Hello, everyone. Shauna Corden here. Welcome to the Playbook for Performance podcast. Our mission is to make work fun again by building better leaders. This month, we're all talking about my new work, the working title, A New Dialogue, and I'm really excited because I'm writing this book about how our culture has gone from let's agree to disagree to this idea if you don't think like me, I don't have room for you. And last week we talked about the price of these fight stories and what fight looks like in this conflict. And this week we're going to talk about the fold stories. And I want to share an excerpt from an interview that I did. So basically this is the context. She decided it wasn't worth it. It was too much energy, the effort required to stay in the space, to hear things she didn't want to hear. It seemed like the opposite of what she believed, so she retreated. At first, not formally, not with declaration, but with a quiet withdrawal. First it was affection, then attention, then time, then availability, and soon her friend became an acquaintance. Someone you'd greet by name, but not stop and chat. And when others asked, how do you know her? You'd say, oh, she's just someone I used to know. And that's the price we pay for not holding the space to have this dialogue, to understand others' points of view, and folding in the face of these different beliefs. Now, I'm sure you've had an experience yourself where you either became upset and you fought, like we talked about last week, or you decided to fold and you decided you were going to place your energy somewhere else. You were going to move in a different direction. And so this week, I'm really excited to say we are launching our first pass at the research that we're doing to support our hypotheses about this topic. And so we're going to be asking people, thinking back over the last couple years, what are the 3 topics related to politics that have caused you the most regret? Now, in my terribly scientific informal surveys that I have done with colleagues, with friends, with my work groups, with my clients, when I ask them about the topics that are most volatile, they often refer to politics. They say it started with the Trump era. Now, I don't know if that's true for everybody, but certainly Trump is a very polarizing figure. People either love him or hate him. They love what he gets done and that he's out of the bureaucracy that we're used to in the government, but they didn't like how he went about it or his ego or things like that. But I think everyone can agree he wasn't the diplomat that we had in the past. He was definitely a different image. And so could you support him if you didn't like him? Could you think he was effective if you didn't like him, etc.? Can we, again, hold these polarizing ideas in one space? I don't know. So we wanted people to list those things. Sometimes it's issues that politics have somehow taken over, even though they're personal topics. So we're seeing a lot of legislation right now about abortion rights. So it could be something like that. But as I brought up issues with people, they were like, oh yeah, and this. And they're not conflicted about how they feel. They have strong opinions. They might not know the answer to this, but they certainly know how they feel about it and when they run into someone who feels differently than they do and that inner turmoil that they feel about it. The second question that we're asking in the survey is thinking back over the last 2 years, what 3 topics related to the pandemic have caused you the most regret? So perhaps you had a fallout with a family member because you chose to be vaccinated and they did not, and their beliefs about it were too much for you to just say, okay, that's your body, your decision, that's fine, I respect that. For whatever reason, you couldn't hold that space, and so you had a fallout, or maybe you said some things that you regretted. And then our last question in this initial survey is, thinking back over the last several years, what 3 topics related to your closest relationships have caused you the most regret? And it could be the politics. It could be pandemic issues, but it could be something different too. It might be a moral compass of right and wrong. It might be a religious belief. It might be tolerance for other cultures. It could be something like that. But we really want to understand, what are the topics that people are, the hill that people are willing to die on. So this is an American expression that says, I'm taking everything and I'm going to fight for this because it's the most important. But this idea of, would you give up a friend over your belief on this topic? Or are their beliefs so adamant on the topic that you feel like you have to pull back from that? They're just too caustic. And so we really want to understand where people are coming from. We want to test our hypotheses. We want to understand as we evolve with what these answers are, and how we go back to with our second phase of questions, how it may differ by gender, by age, by culture. Those are all things that we really want to understand, because it could be that one, either group, region, gender has the corner on the market for holding the space and sticking through the difficult parts of the conversation in order to maintain the relationship. So they're not fighting, they're not folding, they're staying in the space, and they're holding the relationship to be more important than the topic that they are disagreeing on. So that's really what we're going after this week. I certainly have some hypotheses. We'll be posting this out on our social media of Instagram and LinkedIn. Michelle does a fabulous job for us in putting these posts out there. So we're really excited about this. And I want to share a couple of stories that I have heard in the workplace. In the podcast, I often like to highlight leaders that are doing it well, and those that, had a wobble. And when it comes to these discussions, I shared the research, I think it was 2 weeks ago, that was in the Wall Street Journal about the Bay Area companies that were surveyed about return to work policies. And 71% of those leaders said, yeah, we want our employees back in the office full time. Full time. That means 5 days a week. Right? For the last 2 years, most employees have enjoyed working from home relatively full time. We'll say 3/4 time. Maybe they were going back 1 day a week. Talking to family members, they've got an hour commute each way. So that is, they didn't probably think of it this way before, but before the pandemic, that was part of their salary, the cost of earning money. But now it's like, that's 10 hours I'm not getting paid for, and I'm not able to work out at that time. I'm not able to enjoy my hobbies at the time, or whatever they have replaced it with since they've been working from home. And given the difficulties that we're having right now in hiring talent, retaining talent, are leaders willing to give a little bit, to surrender some of that 10 hours back to people? And you may have a commute longer than that, I don't know. But one of the things that I'm seeing right now that one of my clients is doing, which I think is amazing, I applaud them, they are actually interviewing people, space by space, saying, okay, this is what we're looking for. This is why we desire some return to office activities. What do you think? And they're getting the feedback. They're asking them, what does this look like? Later this month, myself and Barbara Troutline are going to be talking about this, about the culture, the new work culture in this whole age of autonomy, now that people can decide when and where they work from and things like that, and how to negotiate that, and how employers should be able to anticipate some of these requests that employees are going to make, and what it's going to look like, what our new hybrid situation is going to look like. And so the leaders that are doing well are the ones that are engaging and asking the questions and getting feedback. They're not declaring the edict. They're not saying, by this date, you're back full time, no questions asked. Those leaders are not going to win friends, influence people, or retain their employees. So I think it's something we really need to pay attention to. Again, the biggest offer I can give to all of you employers who are getting into these difficult discussions is to be curious, seek to understand before being understood, and see what you can negotiate. In the same way that if a employee came to you with a competing job offer and said, hey, I really want to stay, but I cannot ignore this offer. If you didn't have the actual monies, you'd come up with all these little fringe things to make up for it. Whether it was a commuting allowance, whether it was a stipend for home internet, whether it was continued education costs, things like that. Things that you can use to round out the offer if you can't move salary. So again, get creative in this space. Figure out what you can do to help negotiate and show good faith with your employees, because everybody's struggling to hold on to them. So that's what I have for this week. We'll post a link to the survey in the show notes. Once we've hit our required number to be significant, I think, and I'll talk to my consultants on this, we'll actually turn this off, and then we'll load the next load of questions, and you'll have an opportunity to fill out that Google survey form. So really looking forward to your input. Again, if you have a situation that you want to share, you want us to kind of dissect and figure out how we can solve a problem for you, by all means, send us a note to podcast@shaunacorden.com, and we'll see you all next week. Take good care.